400 years ago, the religious climate in England was tense. Religious wars were nothing new, and the head of state was also the head of the Anglican Church. It was a dangerous setup that served to further the absolute power of the monarchy. People harboring a devotion to other faiths needed a place where they could go and practice their religion without fear it was a criminal violation. When colonists began moving to America, it was under the promise that they could practice whatever religion they wanted, except probably witchcraft, and be free from prosecution and persecution. I wish there was a deeper commitment to maintaining separation between any church, and state. But the dismay I feel when I hear loud voices demanding prayer in public schools, the 10 Commandments in every government building, and that women should be more excited about marrying a man and bearing his children than about the degrees they just earned and the careers they imagined for themselves. Apparently that dismay pales in comparison to the dismay Airman First Class Gooch felt at people quietly exercising their faith nearly 400 miles away from him. This is Conduct Unbecoming. I'm Erin, and I'm your host. "27-year-old Sasha Kraus was committed to her Mennonite faith. Mennonites are a Christian group that traces its roots back to the 16th century Netherlands Anabaptist movement. Anabaptists emerged as a group during the Protestant Reformation and are unique because they believe that a church should only include those who publicly profess their faith in Jesus, specifically as adults. This is in contrast to other denominations of Christianity that emphasize baptism for babies to ensure their souls are saved early. Anabaptists largely believe that babies and children aren't responsible for sin because basically they're too young to know better, to exercise free will, or to repent. It is a vast oversimplification, but it helps me to understand it as sort of the 16th century equivalent of our modern refusal to let minors sign binding contracts. Menno Simons, the namesake for the Mennonite denomination and former Catholic priest, was a contemporary of Martin Luther, though it doesn't seem he ever did anything as dramatic as nailing 95 theses to the castle church door. Mennonites are typically committed to peace, community, and service. As with many religions, there's a spectrum of conservatism. When Europe became too perilous due to religious persecution, some Mennonites fled to colonial America, establishing a Mennonite and Mennonite Quaker settlement in Germantown, Pennsylvania. Mennonites are sometimes conflated with Amish populations because denominations of each have sects that decline to participate in modern technology and dress and live more simply. Although Sasha herself used some modern amenities, she lived a life many of us would consider simpler than our own. She still drove a car and kept a cell phone, but strictly adhered to the tenets of her faith. Every morning she woke and donned a head covering to demonstrate her modesty and obedience to God. Her family lived in Grandview, Texas, while she herself lived in Farmington, New Mexico. Sasha's family described her as a good sister, conscientious, and determined. Her parents said she had a sense of confidence that her sisters sometimes mistook as bossiness. On January 18, 2020, Sasha visited her church near Farmington, intent on collecting materials for the following day's Sunday school. When a few hours had passed, Sasha's roommates grew concerned. First, they tried her cell phone but couldn't contact her. Knowing she planned to visit the church, they drove over and found her unlocked car, but no Sasha. The women then reached out to their church leader and soon reported Sasha missing to the local police. In response, investigators put out a missing persons bulletin. Hours turned into days and weeks, but Sasha was still missing. In February 2020, a camper in the Coconino National Forest near Flagstaff, Arizona, summoned police. When they arrived, they found Sasha, dead, lying face down with her hands bound by duct tape. Sasha was dressed but missing her underwear and ever-present head covering. Neither were ever recovered. Sasha died from a single gunshot wound to the back of her head, though she also endured blunt force trauma. The bullet that ended her life was located near the back of Sasha's jawline. Farmington, New Mexico, where Sarah was last seen, was approximately 4 hours, or 263 miles from the Coconino National Forest where her body was discovered. The drive between them circumvents the Navajo Nation, and cell coverage in the vast expanse was maintained by just 3 cell phone towers. Airman First Class Mark Daniel Gooch was also raised in a Mennonite family, though both he and his brother Samuel declined to be baptized and eventually stopped participating in church services. The two had another brother who went on to become a police officer. If forced, I would guess this additional brother similarly declined to be baptized or otherwise left the religion. After leaving the faith, Gooch received his GED and joined the Air Force. Although the faith prioritized peace, conscientious objectors in World War II provided a blueprint for how those of the Mennonite faith might participate in the modern military. I offer that to explain that when Gooch joined the Air Force, it wasn't inherently inconsistent with his upbringing, though perhaps it was intended to be. Those closest to Gooch knew that he resented the Mennonite church he grew up in. The Air Force assigned Gooch to the Luke Air Force Base, a base on the west side of Phoenix. At Luke, Gooch spent his days working as an aircraft mechanic. In his free time, Gooch contacted Samuel with updates from his surveillance of the local Mennonite community. He reported to his brother that the communities in the Phoenix area were a disappointment. He lamented that taking risks was back at zero. All 3 of these Gooch boys harbored anti-Mennonite animus. After news of the novel coronavirus in Wuhan began to circulate, police officer Gooch texted his brothers that he'd given a Mennonite driver a ticket and, quote, coughed on him so he would spread corona. In response, Airman Gooch said he found it effing hilarious and hoped his brother treated the Mennonite members of his community like shit. On Saturday, January 18th, 2020, Gooch set off from the base where he lived. Video surveillance captured his car as it was leaving. Inside his car, he carried his .22 caliber rifle. Cell phone records indicated that Gooch set off toward Farmington, a 6-hour drive from Phoenix. His and Sasha's cell phones left the church simultaneously and pinged the towers together until Sasha's phone stopped connecting to cell sites near New Mexico's border with Arizona. From there, Gooch's cell phone continued to connect with the 3 towers covering the expanse between Farmington and the Coconino National Forest. Gooch's cell phone was the only cell phone to ping all 3 towers that Saturday. And I'm not talking between his cell phone and Sasha's cell phone, but for all cell phones in that area. Only his connected to all 3 towers. When Gooch and Sasha reached the National Forest, Gooch set about his gruesome task. Over 2 hours later, he traveled back to Luke Air Force Base. This final 90-mile journey returned him to Luke in the morning, where video surveillance and gate entry data confirmed his return. Additional surveillance cameras on base revealed Gooch carrying a plastic bag into his residence before discarding a similar bag in the dumpster. That bag was not recovered. After Farmington police pushed out that missing persons bulletin, Gooch repeatedly visited the bulletin on social media, keeping an eye out for updates. When an update finally came, when investigators revealed they'd discovered Sasha's body, Gooch purchased a complete interior clean and car detailing. He reached out to his brother Samuel and asked what he should do. Samuel advised asking the detailer to spray his car with disinfectant. Next, Gooch visited the commissary on base, where he purchased a bottle of bleach. He didn't need the anonymity of an off-base store or paying cash, but thank goodness he didn't pay taxes on that bottle he bought to destroy evidence. Gooch submitted multiple tickets to his cell phone provider, requesting to wipe his location history from January and February 2020. Having realized how incriminating a phone could be, unlike Perry from episode 50 or Murphy from episode 46. If February seems a little out of left field, let me explain. In addition to that loop trip in which Gooch kidnapped Sasha, drove her to Arizona, and murdered her, Gooch made a series of return trips to the scene of the crime. Even if Gooch could successfully clean or dispose of anything that might have Sasha's DNA or would otherwise tie him to the crime, there was still the problem of his gun. As a stopgap measure, Gooch asked a coworker to store his .22 caliber rifle and ammunition in his gun safe. When investigators later spoke to Gooch, he asserted he traveled to Farmington to attend a church service, that he'd traveled all that way because he was seeking out the faith he was raised in. He was looking for fellowship. Instead of going to those Phoenix churches he found and was disappointed by, he claimed he drove 6 hours to a city where the local Mennonite population had never heard of him, to attend services with people he'd never met, then turned around and drove straight home. No stops at forests, national or otherwise. But those assertions directly conflicted with the data-driven timeline investigators put together, and they arrested him. While he was in custody, Gooch reached out to Samuel with a few requests. First, he needed Samuel to remotely wipe his phone. Second, he needed Samuel to come to Phoenix. So Samuel waited patiently at a departure gate in Wisconsin. It was early May 2020, and he was traveling to Phoenix to be a support to his brother who'd been charged with murder. Given the limitations at that time, Samuel could kind of be there for his brother without having to physically be in Phoenix. Samuel wasn't traveling just to be there for morale. He was there to accomplish something. To pick up what he thought was a murder weapon and remove or otherwise destroy it. So, if you're familiar with the idea that appellate courts don't like to use names for people who didn't commit crimes, I can share that Samuel was arrested for this trip to Phoenix to attempt to take or otherwise destroy a murder weapon. After police had arrested Gooch, the colleague with the actual stashed murder weapon provided the gun and bullets to investigators. A ballistic expert concluded Gooch's .22 caliber rifle fired the shot that killed Sasha. Gooch retained his own expert, who kind of predictably disagreed with the state's expert and called the results inconclusive. The people of the state of Arizona charged Gooch with 1 count of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and misdemeanor theft. The theft charge related to Sasha's head covering and underwear. During his trial, Gooch moved for a judgment of acquittal on the misdemeanor theft offenses. In support of that motion, Gooch argued that the prosecutors didn't show Sasha was wearing a head covering and underwear at the time of her abduction. The trial court denied the motion. I didn't see any mention of sexual violence toward Sasha, and I don't know if that means that when her body was finally discovered a month later, decomposition had set in, or if her body was largely preserved by the cold weather and there was no sexual violence. In general, this set of facts leads me to believe that Gooch removed Sasha's head covering and underwear because he knew what an affront that was in Sasha's religion. He knew that making her immodest in the eyes of God mattered. He had what seemed to be a lot of pent-up anger toward his former religion, and he elected to take it out on a vulnerable young woman who had the misfortune of wandering across his path while she was alone. It's not dissimilar to Rina Shimabukuro from episode 51. At trial, both the prosecutor and defense counsel relied on the tenets of the Mennonite faith to paint the picture of what happened. Prosecutors explained that Sasha adhered to a doctrine of non-resistance to explain why there were no signs of struggle. They pointed toward the Mennonite community and explained why its adherents couldn't have murdered Sasha, but why Gooch, disillusioned with a faith he rejected as a young adult, could and did. In response, defense counsel argued that Gooch was raised in the same way with those same values and that his upbringing made him a peaceful, non-violent person. Gooch's father climbed into the witness box to tell the court that he'd never seen his son engage in violent behavior and that he'd raised him to be both peaceful and non-violent. But Gooch was raised in the same household as a police officer that thought the idea of infecting a citizen he ostensibly served with a potentially fatal respiratory virus was funny. The same household as a man who traveled across the country to help hide what he thought was a murder weapon. Gooch's father testified that although his son had declined to be baptized, he hadn't turned fully from the light. The prosecutor seized on this testimony, rebutting the notion that Gooch hadn't fully rejected Mennonite teachings and tenets. Essentially, Gooch's actions made it clear that he rejected the tenets of peace and nonviolence as soundly as he'd rejected his baptism. Putting Samuel's arrest into context with the colleague that stored the actual murder weapon, I think it's fair to assume that Gooch had more than one firearm. When Gooch took the time to select a gun, drove 6 hours to surveil a Mennonite community he resented, kidnapped Sasha, bound her hands, drove her hours away to a remote area of a national forest, and shot her in the back of the head while standing above her, when he executed Sasha, there was nothing peaceful about it. In spite of those actions, others described Gooch as hardworking, respectful, inquisitive, and kind. The jury found Gooch guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. 11 of the 12 jurors found both premeditated and felony murder. The final juror found only felony murder. Premeditation involves a plan to kill, which could perhaps be evidenced by researching the location of Mennonite communities, driving up on a day off work, .22 caliber rifle in tow, waiting outside of a church on a Saturday evening, and snatching a woman before driving her to a national forest, binding her, and shooting her. Felony murder would require that Gooch was committing a felony, in this case kidnapping, and that a death happened in the commission of that felony. It sounds like the jury deliberations must have been interesting, and I wish I knew more about what hurdles the holdout juror had regarding premeditation. Either way, 12 jurors convicted Gooch of first-degree murder and kidnapping, and the court rendered a guilty verdict for the misdemeanor theft offense. The court sentenced Gooch to a life term for first-degree murder, 5 years for the kidnapping to be served consecutively, and time served for the misdemeanor theft. His lawyer lamented that Gooch wouldn't have a chance at life outside prison even decades from now. On appeal, much of Gooch's argument focused on supposed prosecutorial misconduct, which was largely dealt with by the appellate justices, reiterating that what a prosecutor says in closing argument is not evidence, it's argument. The portion of the appeal that I think is interesting is Gooch's assertion that the Arizona trial court didn't have subject matter jurisdiction to charge him for the misdemeanor theft of Sasha's head covering and undergarment. In support of this argument, Gooch alleged that the prosecutor failed to introduce evidence that the misdemeanor theft took place in Arizona. In general, in order to charge somebody for a crime, that crime has to have been committed within the bounds of that jurisdiction. For example, if you commit murder in broad daylight in New York City and flee to a neighboring state, The neighboring state doesn't generally get to charge you for that murder in New York City. But Arizona allows subject matter jurisdiction over a crime, wherever it was committed, when the effect or result of that crime occurs in Arizona, and it takes some fancy footwork to get there here. The state retains jurisdiction over an offense committed in another state if the result of such criminal activity has a substantial effect within Arizona. The way the court reasoned, it didn't matter if Gooch took those items from Sasha in New Mexico, or only developed the intent to do so in New Mexico. When Gooch left Sasha's body in the woods in Arizona, it was at that point that he permanently deprived Sasha of the clothing items. That's what gave the Arizona trial court subject matter jurisdiction over the misdemeanor theft. In total, the appellate court in Arizona determined that Gooch showed no error, rejected all of his arguments for various reasons, and affirmed the judgment. Before I send you off this episode, I want to take a minute to draw your attention to the highlights of Conduct Unbecoming's second year. This year, our community of legal beagles continued to grow. Although we wished Google Podcasts a fond farewell early in the year, I transitioned the pod to YouTube Music and started publishing what are technically videos over on YouTube. There, people seem to really be enjoying the ability to add comments on specific episodes. My personal favorite episode of the second season was episode 43, the Port Chicago 50. I do realize that I missed an opportunity to make episode 50, the Port Chicago 50, but I suppose you all will forgive me. Your favorite episode remains episode 12, the United States versus Epps. Across all platforms, that is the best performing episode and has nearly twice as many listens as any of the others. I've been really fortunate this year to hear from so many legal beagles, both personal friends and new listeners. I've heard from family members and friends of the subjects of episodes, and I remain very grateful to have this space with you. It is my sincere hope that you end this year in a way that feels positive to you, and look forward to what the next year of Conduct Unbecoming holds. So as always, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it. I invite you to submit case suggestions and feedback to conductunbecomingpod@gmail.com or on conductunbecomingpod.com. Join me next time for an episode that I promise will make you feel like your visit home this year was not nearly as chaotic as it could have been. Until then, take care. Conduct Unbecoming is a podcast where I get to talk about interesting crimes and cases that involve U.S. military service members. I research, write, and produce the podcast myself. The opinions expressed are my own, and perhaps it's obvious. Conduct Unbecoming is not approved, authorized, or endorsed by the Department of Defense.